Welcome, everybody. My name is Janet Gray, and for those of you who are not members, and we seem to have a fair number here, welcome. And I just want to give a couple of sentences about At Home on the Sound, in case you're not familiar with it. At Home is an organization that tries to enrich life for the seniors in the community. And they provide transportation to all kinds of appointments if you become a member, as well as a variety of social and educational programs. This is a Tuesday lecture series that has as a member of the Sound Desk, which is interesting to me. So we hope we see some of you on December 12th. It's a pleasure to introduce Barbara Davis. She is the co-director of the Westchester Historical Society, and as you know, she's going to speak about leading ladies from Westchester in different media. Barbara is responsible for the programming, publicity, and other operations at the Westchester County Historical Society. She lives nearby in New Rochelle and has been the New Rochelle City Historian for over 20 years. Is that right? And before that, she served, somebody mentioned they knew her from the New Rochelle Library. She also was in community relations at the public library there. And Barbara gives talks on a wide variety of topics, and I just heard she has one on historical restaurants.
Yep, dining in historic settings.
Dining in historic settings. Might be fun too. So I'm very happy to welcome her. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for that introduction. I'm delighted to be here. Can everyone see the screen okay? Anybody need to adjust? Please adjust. And you can all hear me okay? I have a booming voice, my daughter tells me. So Westchester's been home to many leaders in a variety of fields for over 300 years since its inception. Some of the founding fathers, and just every field is covered. But the number of award-winning actresses and actors who have made homes here in Westchester is really quite extraordinary. So why Westchester? Well, of course, the proximity to New York City. That's obvious, and the global culture that is in that metropolitan area. But also the county's many magnetizing attributes. Among them, the natural beauty, I always say the topography. We have fabulous topography. We have strong communities, each unique, each with its own personality, each with its unique vibe, excellent schools, and we, of course, have a deep sense of history. Pioneering silent movie company called the Thanhouser Film Corporation. The studio would produce over 1,000 films during its 10-year stay in New Rochelle. Here you see the actors in front of what was the first high school, today City Hall in New Rochelle. The whole city was their set. And he had a number of leading actresses, including Florence LeBeatty, who apparently had a thing with Woodrow Wilson. When he was the governor of New Jersey, he would come and watch her. There's quite a rumor. Actually, I have to tell you that once I had a phone call from this man who said, I'm Charles Lockman. I'm the executive producer of Inside Edition, and I'm working on a story that involves a presidential scandal in New Rochelle. And I said, which one? There were 3. Another program for you. The infamous and famous of New Rochelle. And here's Muriel Ostrich. She was also an actress with Thanhouser. After Thanhouser, she would go on to do the commercials for Moxie. She became the Moxie girl. Moxie was a drink that gave you moxie, gave you strength because it had a little bit of cocaine in it. But that's beside the point. So the Thanhouser studio started on Grove Street and Center Avenue, right off Main Street, about where the bread factory is now, if you know that. And it had a terrible fire, January 13th, 1913. While it was burning down, they were filming the whole thing, and they made a movie when the studio burned. Later, they reopened on Main Street. It was in a building that stands today as Tedesco Auto Body. I passed by it on the way here. Their studio went all the way back to Long Island Sound. On the top, you see some of the movies that were produced. The grandson of Edwin and Gertrude Thanhauser, Ned Thanhauser, has rescued, preserved, and digitized about a third of the films that were produced. These weren't honky-tonk films. These were genuine dramatic presentations, silent though. And he did very well. People across the country knew Thanhauser. It wasn't until the independents, not because of the talkies, but because the independents were squashed by the syndicates. Meanwhile, he closed in 1919, and in 1920, D.W. Griffith opened his studios in Oriental Point, not far from here in Mamaroneck. And two of his leading stars were Lillian and Dorothy Gish. They had started on stage when they were quite little. They were actually helping their mother financially. Their father was a deadbeat. He had left them penniless, so she started them acting very, very early. They were introduced to D.W. Griffith by Mary Pickford, and he took a liking to them and paid their way to New York. They rented this house in New Rochelle with their mother while they were making the films in Mamaroneck. This is now the Huguenot Yacht Club, but this was their home when they lived, when they were working. Now, Lillian was the better known of the two sisters, though Dorothy would go on to make over 100 films herself. Lillian, with her dramatic eyelashes, was the lead in a number of Griffith's films shot in Mamaroneck, including Broken Blossoms, including Orphans of the Storm, including the horribly racist film Birth of a Nation, and also including Way Down East, which is my favorite. It's a long movie, but I love the scene of her jumping off onto a ice floe and then lying on the ice floe, and then she's rescued by her lover, who was also racing across the ice floes. This was filmed in White River Junction, Vermont, and she apparently thought it would look better if her hand was dangling over the side of the ice floe, and as a result could never use her hand fully again. She had gotten such bad frostbite. But it was a terrific film, and all filmed in Mamaroneck except for that one very dramatic scene. The Westchester County Historical Society has a terrific collection of photographs that were taken during the filming of Orphans of the Storm. You see one here of the two Gish sisters. Now, speaking of Mary Pickford, she was born in Toronto, and she first performed on stage like most of these early actresses and later actresses as well. She had her big break when she went to work for D.W. Griffith, who, as you know, started in the West and then moved to Mamaroneck, and the Mamaroneck historians will tell you that Hollywood became Mamaroneck of the West because his big film studio was in Mamaroneck. By 1920s, Mary Pickford was the highest paid actress in America, actually in the world. While working for D.W. Griffith, she lived here in Larchmont Manor, just about over there, in this house that you see here. And interestingly, Douglas Fairbanks and his family were just down the street at the Bevan Hotel. And apparently, they say that Fairbanks would go off for a little walk and end up in Mary Pickford's place because her husband was away, and then he would trot back to be with his family. Well, they eventually both divorced and married one another. And
was it the one with the red roof? Or
no, the little one, the little cottage. I think the one with the roof is the Bevan Hotel, but I'm not sure. No, it's not. Okay, we need Judith Spikes here to tell us. Any rate, her many film roles led to the nicknames, but the Bevan Hotel just got sold like a year ago, didn't it? I think for 14 or 15 million. What's that?
It's had more than one sale, a couple of sales.
In the last few years? Okay.
It's not a hotel, it's a lovely.
Oh, I know, it's a single-family home, yeah. Any rate, Mary Pickford's roles led to her nickname America's Sweetheart, Little Mary, and the Girl with the Curls. Her marriage to Douglas Fairbanks was known by all. I should also say that she was a leader in trying to get the union going for actors and actresses. Even though she was fabulously wealthy, she was looking out for her colleagues who were not well paid, who were not well taken care of, and she was always at odds against the syndicate. She also, with Douglas Fairbanks and Charlie Chaplin, did an enormous amount of work in raising bonds for World War I. She was really quite a woman. And even though they separated, she lived out her years at Pick Fair in Beverly Hills, and they remained very good friends, though he died way before she did. Now we're going to cross to Yonkers to 179 Park Hill Avenue. Park Hill's that charming turn-of-the-century neighborhood in Yonkers up on the hill. And this is where Richard Bennett raised his 3 daughters, all of whom went into acting. Barbara appeared in a few films in the 1920s, but she had some deep emotional, psychological problems, and she would have medical problems as well, dying of a heart attack early at the age of 54. Her other 2 sisters, though, went on to fame. Constance Bennett made eventually 57 films, including some of the ones you see here. And she would become the highest paid star, making $30,000 a week in the 1930s. Apparently, though, she thought of acting as a means of supporting a lifestyle rather than a career. By the 1950s, she had retired from screen work and formed her own cosmetic company. She married 5 times. One of her husbands, a marquis, was formerly married to Gloria Swanson, another leading woman of Westchester. And Constance was buried in Arlington National Cemetery with her final husband. The youngest Bennett sister, Joan, starred in a number of B movies and some worthy films as well, including Little Women, one of my favorites. She starred in that with Katharine Hepburn and did this very dramatic swooning scene. In the 40s and 50s, she was married to film producer Walter Wagner, and she landed many roles and became a bombshell brunette. She's one of the few that went from blonde to brunette. And she played a role in Trade Winds, and that she wore the wig before dyeing it. She too was married 5 times and was a feisty Hollywooder, confessing once to having shipped a live skunk to the home of Hedda Hopper on Valentine's Day, 1950. There's a little bit of a theme going on here. From Huntsville, Alabama, Tallulah Bankhead made her stage debut at the age of 16, playing Gladys Sinclair in Squab Farm. Although she had a long contract with Paramount Films, by 1931, she switched to stage work, and that is what won her great acclaim. And she stuck with theater until her role in Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat. She made many more films during her career, which was peppered with numerous and highly publicized love affairs and scandals typical of Hollywood stars of her day. And she too was well known for her caustic remarks, particularly about Betty Davis. She once said, "Don't think I don't know who's been spreading gossip about me and my temperament out there in Hollywood. And after all the nice things I've said about the hag, when I get hold of her, I'll tear out every hair of her mustache." She retired to a home in Pound Ridge. And it was quiet, woodsy Pound Ridge. I have to tell you, when I was a kid growing up in Pound Ridge, I had a good friend that lived across the street of this abandoned house. And Toby and I used to go lurking around the property and looking in the house and sometimes sneaking in the house and Later found out it had been Tallulah Bankhead's house. I had no idea who Tallulah Bankhead was, just thought it was cool that there was this abandoned house there. So also in Pound Ridge, that very woodsy area was attractive to Jessica Tandy and her husband, Hume Cronin. They built their final home in Pound Ridge, and I happen to have some pictures of it. It was quite fabulous on a lake with this infinity pool and just a really unique contemporary house. They shared the property with Hume Cronin's cousin, Robert Whitehead, the producer, and we'll hear about them in just a moment. So Jessica was born in England and made her stage debut in New York in 1930, but she preferred the stage, but would go on to making no less than 40 films. She won 3 Tonys and an Emmy and an Oscar, including one for Driving Miss Daisy. She and her husband appeared together in the 1987 movie Cocoon, which was written by New Rochelle resident David Saperstein. And the star-studded cast also included another Westchester leading lady, Gwen Verdon, who was a longtime resident of Bronxville. Remarkably, Gwen Verdon suffered from childhood disease that caused terrible problems with her legs. They were badly misshapen, she could hardly walk, so her mother encouraged her with dance and had her take dance lessons, and the rest is history. She won 4 Tony Awards and one as Best Supporting or Featured Actress for Can Can, requiring a lot of dancing, and 3 as Best Actress for Damn Yankees, a role she recreated in the film version of the same name, and for Girl in the Town in a win with her co-star Thelma Ritter, and in 1959 another for Redhead. Miss Verdon was also nominated for Best Musical for Sweet Charity and for Chicago. Although she and Bob Fosse separated, they remained married until his death in '87. By the way, she was awarded the American National Medal of the Arts in 1998 by the NEA. Here's Claire Trevor. Born Claire Wimlinger in 1910, she became the queen of film noir. She was a remarkable actress, famous for playing moles, floozies, and broads, and was cast as the owner of a rowdy saloon in many a Western. She starred opposite the likes of John Wayne, who she propelled his career in Stagecoach, Clark Gable, Glenn Ford, and William Holden. She also won an Oscar for her turn as Edward G. Robinson's floozy in Key Largo, and won nominations for similar roles in Dead End and The High and the Mighty. Does anybody remember Claire Trevor? She was born in Bensonhurst, but grew up in Larchmont, right here. Her career started when she was living in an apartment in New Rochelle, though. The family lost their money during the Depression, so they all left their house in Larchmont and moved to Center Avenue, pictured here. And she started making films traveling to Long Island City. Eartha Kitt, born Eartha Mae Key in the South and raised in Harlem, she attended the New York School for Performing Arts, and soon she would be headlining in Paris. She made her acting debut as Helen of Troy in Orson Welles' staging of Faust. The following year, she came to Broadway in a musical revue called New Faces of 1952, and she stopped the show on a nightly basis with her rendition of C'est si bon. Can't do it as well as she can. It was the first of many top 10 hits for her, and she would be one of the few African-American performers who was allowed on white stations. She would be playing both with black casts as well as white casts, but she was predominantly cast in African-American films such as St. Louis Blues. The film also featured Ella Fitzgerald, who grew up in Yonkers. Miss Kitt made several well-received TV guest appearances in the 50s and 60s, but she found a niche as the Catwoman on a 1967 installment of Batman. She became a tween's idol. Julie Harris, quite different kind of actor, was a theater star since the 50s. She received 10 Tony nominations, and she won 5 for The Glass Menagerie, The Belle of Amherst, I Am a Camera, and The Gin Game. Her films included Member of the Wedding and East of Eden. She was so lucky to perform with James Dean, and he was lucky to perform with her. She lived in Irvington in the 1970s, where she became very involved with the Clearview School and was very active with it. It's now located in Briarcliff Manor. In 2005, we have here a picture posing with George W. Bush and Laura Bush and other Kennedy honorees to get the National Medal of the Arts. And this included Robert Redford, Tina Turner, Suzanne Farrell, singer Tony Bennett, and unfortunately Miss Harris died in 2013. Broadway theaters dimmed the lights for her. Shirley Jones, another actress with a former Irvington address. Her career spanned more than 6 decades, although she performed in memorable roles such as wholesome young women in musicals such as Oklahoma, Carousel, and The Music Man. Many of us remember her for The Partridge Family. When she married Jack Cassidy and they lived in Irvington, she landed the lead role in the new musical TV show in 1970. She was Shirley Partridge, the widowed mother of 5 children who comprised the singing group and included her stepson, of course, the heartthrob David Cassidy. It also included Susan Day, who grew up in Mount Kisco. And Susan Day would go on. She was a graduate of Fox Lane High School, got her start with the Partridge Family, but probably became more well-known as Grace Van Owen in LA Law. And then sort of dropped off the map. Haven't heard much of her at all. Though there was a very interesting piece in Sunday's Times where they asked 2 younger editors of the style section to watch LA Law and give their feedback. And it was a hoot because, of course, they said, what do people do at their desk if they have no computer? All these lawyers. It was such a time warp to hear what their impression was. And there are so many blondes, they said. Anyway, if you have the Sunday Times, it was a good read in the style section. So Deborah Winger is also a Rivertowns resident, living in Dobbs Ferry with her husband, actor and director Arliss Howard. She has performed in An Officer and a Gentleman, Terms of Endearment, and Shadowlands. Each earned her nominations for an Academy. We also saw her in several other films, including A Dangerous Woman, Urban Cowboy, Legal Eagles, Black Widow, and more. Frances Sternhagen, one of my favorites. She crosses so many categories. She made her Broadway debut in 1955 in The Skin of Her Teeth. The same year she had her off-Broadway debut, and the following year she had her television debut. She made her film debut in a high school drama, Up the Down Staircase. Her film work has included Fedora, Starting Over, Independence Day, Raising Cain, romantic comedy, Doc Hollywood. Her numerous television appearances include ER, she was Carter's grandmother, Cheers, she was Cliff's mother, Tales from the Crypt, Law and Order, The Road Home, and Sex and the City, where she was Mr. Big's mother. Right, she plays everything. She's won over 2 Tony Awards, one for the original Broadway production of The Good Doctor, and in 1995 for the play The Heiress, based on Henry James's novella. And she was nominated for Tony Awards 5 other times, and her best-known off-Broadway production was in Driving Miss Daisy, same role as Jessica Tandy. They were quite good friends. She and her husband, Tom Carlin, lived in Sutton Manor in New Rochelle. She still lives there, where they raised their 5 children. And I show this clip from the Standard Star, our erstwhile newspaper. It's of Sutton Manor snake dances for Sternhagen. It's a tight-knit community right on the Sound, right above the municipal marina. Only 52 houses. They all get along. They have a boathouse they share. And everybody was watching the Emmy Awards. And when she won, they all got out in their pajamas, banging the pots and doing a snake dance through the streets. Now, another cherished New Rochelle resident, Miss D, was the first black woman to play in the American Shakespeare Festival in Stratford, the major Shakespearean roles. She's also a major American film actress and television performer, also a writer, also a producer. She and Ozzie had an amazing television program on PBS and a radio show. They made New Rochelle their permanent home in 1961 and became incredibly active in the community. Her Broadway debut came in 1943. She was still in college. She attended Hunter, and she was in the play version of South Pacific. It wasn't called South Pacific then. And 3 years later, she appeared in a Broadway show called Jeb and performed next to an actor who would become her husband, Ozzie Davis. They married in 1948. She went on to many roles. There was Bozeman and Lena with James Earl Jones. She won an Obie for that as Kate in Taming of the Shrew. And in many, many films, she played with Sidney Poitier in The Edge of the City and Pearly Victorious, with Nat King Cole. She played in many programs, many movies, also with her husband, starring in also the stage version of Pearly Victorious, which has just been revived very successfully. Ruby Dee and Ozzie Davis were awarded the National Medal of the Arts, and they're shown here in the White House to get it with their children, Guy Davis, Hesna, and Nora. We dedicated the Ozzie Davis Theater in honor of Ozzie Davis in 2005, and Ruby spoke at the event pictured here. And after her death, the park next to the library was named the Ruby Dee Park at Library Green. And I thought it was so perfect because they're still together, but they both have their own places dedicated to them. Now, going back up north to Pound Ridge again, the Pound Ridge area, Colleen Dewhurst actually lived in a number of Westchester communities, including Yonkers as a child, and then Lewisboro, and then right on the Pound Ridge line, where she was living at the time of her death. Her starring role in All the Way Home won her a Tony, as did her performance in A Moon for the Misbegotten. She also won 4 Emmy Awards. She and George C. Scott had a tumultuous relationship. They were married and divorced twice, and seemed to manage. He had a cabin in Lewisboro that she would live in periodically while performing, and we see her pictured there. On television, here's some of her other. She was in The Sister Act, The Nun Story, and on television she portrayed Murphy Brown's mother. I think we all remember, a woman who was even more independent than her daughter. And as I said, the movies include The Nun Story, An Almost Perfect Person. And that was directed by another leading lady, Zoe Caldwell. I said that Hume Cronin and Jessica Tandy had the house on the lake. Right above them, Zoe Caldwell's husband, Robert Whitehead, built their house, and so Zoe and Robert Whitehead lived right above the Cronins in Pound Ridge, and she continued living there until her death just 3 years ago. In addition to her directing successes, Ms. Caldwell won Tony Awards 4 times, including her performances on Broadway in Tennessee Williams' Slapstick Tragedy, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, Medea, and probably she was most well known for her performance in Masterclass. And she also was in a number of movies. B. Arthur, born Bernice Frankel, good thing she changed her name, B. Arthur's much better, began her career on stage in 1947 and won a Tony in 1960 for the Best Featured Actress in a musical for her role in Maine. Can't you imagine her in Maine? Perfect. Almost as perfect as who was in it? Ethel Merman? No. Rosalind Russell. In 1971, Arthur was invited by Norman Lear to be a guest star in the sitcom before that, All in the Family, starting off as the cousin of Edith Bunker. She was the liberal, outspoken feminist, considered the antithesis of the caricatured reactionary character Archie Bunker, who described his wife's cousin as a New Deal fanatic. Nearly 50, Arthur's tart turn on All the Family impressed viewers so much, and the executives at CBS, that they gave her her own show. And that became simply Maude. The show debuted in '72 and found her living in the affluent community of Tuckahoe in Westchester with her fourth husband, Walter, Bill Macy, and divorced daughter, Carol. In 1977, after several nominations, she got an Emmy for that role. Then, at the age of 63, Arthur was cast in The Golden Girls, where she played a divorced mother and substitute teacher living with her friends and her mother. And did you all know that Esther Getty, who played her mother, was actually a year younger than B. Arthur? Yeah, but she was a great actress and had good makeup, and she did it, and it was a fabulous show. She got several Emmy nominations and finally won the award in 1988, and others would follow. And her final Broadway review in 2002 was as B. Arthur on Broadway, called Between Friends, and she was living at Bedford at the time. She was a longtime champion of equal rights for women, everything that Maude stood for in All in the Family plus more, and also was very generous to Jewish causes as well as LGBTQ causes. Now, we really can't count Anne Bancroft, but we can, because even though she was born in the Bronx as Anna Maria Luisa Italiano, her parents lived in Yonkers, and she spent a lot of time visiting them. She started her cinematic career as Marilyn Monroe in the Marilyn Monroe movie, Don't Bother to Knock. And 1958, her debut in Seesaw, opposite Henry Fonda, won her a Tony. She won another Tony as Anne Sullivan in The Miracle Worker, and then would get an Oscar for the performance on Broadway. She received her second nomination for Pumpkin Eater, but I think we all remember her as in The Graduate, as Mrs. Robinson, and she won her third Academy Award nomination for that role. By the way, in this one, another age thing, she was 36 years old, and Dustin Hoffman was 30. But again, he was a good actor and good makeup. And she won her fourth nomination for The Turning Point opposite Shirley MacLaine, and a fifth for Agnes of God opposite Jane Fonda. She took a number of supporting roles and died in 2005, leaving her husband Mel Brooks, still alive, who she married in 1964. She is buried in Kensico Cemetery, her final resting home, so we can claim her. Jane Alexander, another Rivertowns actress. Hold on one sec. I often don't use a script, but I clearly need a script for this because I can't remember all of these movies and plays. She was born in Boston and is the former director of the National Endowment of the Arts, a Tony Award winner and two-time Emmy Award winner. She made her Broadway debut in The Great White Hope and won the 1969 Tony for her performance in a play. She's played in so many other ones, including the film version of Great White Hope, and received the first of 4 Academy Award nominations for that performance. She also performed in The President's Men, Kramer versus Kramer, The Testament. She's an 8-time Emmy nominee and received the first one for playing Eleanor Roosevelt in Eleanor and Franklin. And also awards for playing For Time and Warm Springs. Here she is on Halloween, dressed up for another role as a witch for the neighborhood children in Irvington. She really got into it. She's performed very serious plays by Ibsen, Chekhov, and Shakespeare, and really prefers stage. And here she is on the stage of a film called Grand Horizons, which in previews got great acclaim. However, it opened the last week in February 2020, right before the pandemic, and it closed down, and that was it, unfortunately. She continues to be an ardent advocate for sustainable environmental policy and responsible ecological conservation. Another former Northern Westchester resident, Jill Clayburgh, was born in New York City and appeared on the Broadway stage before going into films. And here are just a few of hers: Portney's Complaint, Silver Streak, I'm Dancing as Fast as I Can. She generally played the same kind of woman, usually middle-aged woman, struggling but being strong through many different things. She would win an Oscar nomination for An Unmarried Woman and another for Starting Over. She dated Al Pacino for 5 years and appeared with him briefly in an episode of NYPD, but she would marry screenwriter and playwright David Robbie in 1979. And they lived in Mount Kisco before they moved to Lakeville, Connecticut, where she died after a 20-year battle with leukemia. All those movies we just saw, all those things I just mentioned, she was struggling with leukemia at the time, but managed to soldier on and play a woman who always was soldiering on, which is interesting. One of her neighbors was Susan Sarandon, contributor to many local causes. She was born Susan Abigail Tomlin. She's performed on stage in Extremities, Private Ear, Private Eye, A Couple of Chicks Sitting Around Talking. And her films include Dead Man Walking, for which she won an Oscar, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, Field of Dreams, and others that we see here. She received her first Academy nomination in Atlantic City, and one of her best commercial successes was in Bill Durham. And then she won more nominations for Thelma and Louise, my favorite movie, Going Off the Cliff, with Gina Davis, but all that they do before that. The Client, and she won an award for an Oscar for Dead Man Walking. Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon raised their family in a home in Pound Ridge on Honey Hollow Road, where Ally McGraw grew up, on Honey Hollow Road. And what do we know Ally McGraw for? Love Story. Love means never having to say you're sorry. Right. She first gained attention in Goodbye Columbus, though, and that was followed by Love Story. She was married to Steve McQueen and appeared with him in the film The Getaway. Apparently, he did not want her to have a career. And she finally smartened up and divorced him and never made another film. But instead went out and got into yoga and good living. I saw a picture of her the other day. She looks fabulous and made a real good life for herself. Glenn Close's home was in Bedford until just a few years ago. And while living here in Bedford and Westchester, she contributed to many local causes. She won Tony Awards for stage roles in The Real Thing and The Death of the Maiden, and she grew great acclaim for and Tony for her over-the-top performance in Sunset Boulevard. She received 3 Emmys and 1 win for television movies, And her film credits included The World According to Garp, that was her first film, The Big Chill, I love that film, Reversal of Fortune, Dangerous Liaison, and 101 Dalmatians, and others. 6-time Academy Award nominee, tying now with Deborah Kerr and Thelma Ritter. Now, the suburban setting of the movie she starred in Fatal Attraction was Bedford, her home. And in that movie, has everyone seen it? There's a very sad rabbit scene. I won't go into it. She played a vengeful, to say the least, other woman opposite Michael Douglas, who was also living in Bedford at the time, with his wife, Catherine Zeta-Jones. But it was not a true story. It was a great movie, though. She's a Welsh-born actress, performed in a wide variety of films, probably best known for her portrayal as Roxy Hart in Chicago. And she won the 2002 Academy for Best Supporting Actress for that role. Miss Zeta-Jones and Michael Douglas lived in this house in Bedford for many years until they moved to this house in Irvington, where they live now. So they went from Bedford to the Horsey area to the river towns, and they overlook the Hudson now. Another powerhouse couple of Westchester is Eli Wallach and Ann Jackson. They've been cited as the longest married Hollywood couple, and they spent much of their life performing together. But Miss Jackson performed in stage, film, television, as well as with her husband. I had the great privilege, in another life I had a catering business, and they were performing love letters at the Emlyn Theater in Mamaroneck, and I catered the reception, great reception, heart-shaped cookies, strawberry dipped in chocolate, all those romantic kind of things. And they could not have been nicer. I mean, usually nobody pays attention to the caterer, but they wanted a goodie bag to take home with them on their way home to Pound Ridge. It was really a treat for me. And it was a great, great performance. Here are some of the other ones that she performed in: How to Save Your Marriage and Ruin Your Life, not needed in hers. And it was a very ironically titled film, as was another one of hers, Lovers and Other Strangers, because they were devoted to one another and lived long, good lives. Two sisters, Felicia Rashad and Debbie Allen, grew up in Mount Vernon. Debbie, I don't have a picture of her, a separate picture, actress, dancer, choreographer, television director, television producer, and former member of the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities, probably best known for being the genius behind Fame, the television program, and she was the choreographer and performed as the teacher, Lydia Grant. Felicia Rashad, best known as Clara Huxtable, the wife of Dr. Huxtable, played by Bill Cosby. She's now the Dean of Fine Arts at Howard University. She was the first Black actress to win a Tony, and this was for her role in A Raisin in the Sun. Second Tony was for Skeleton Crew, and she's also won the NAACP Image Award and numerous others. Vanessa Williams actually grew up in Westchester as well, to Millwood, and returned nearby, living in Chappaqua now. She was raised in a household of music. Both parents were music teachers, and went on to perform at Syracuse University and get her degree. And then in 1983, the Miss America title, which was then taken away from her, but who cares? She went on to bigger and better things. She's been honored with 2 NAACP Image Awards, 9 Grammy Award nominations, and a number of other music awards. And she's had a distinguished career in theater, television, and Hollywood movies. She had a triumphant 9-month run in The Kiss of the Spider Woman on Broadway. Her third album, The Sweetest Days, went platinum, as did her single called Colors of the Wind from the soundtrack of Pocahontas, written by Alan Menken of New Rochelle, by the way. And a Globe and Globe Award, and many, many others. And she keeps going on and doing fabulous things. including performing in Desperate Housewives. And here's another Desperate Housewife who actually became really a Desperate Housewife. Felicity Kendall Huffman, a native of Bedford, the daughter of Grace Valet and Moore Peters Huffman, a banker and partner of Morgan Stanley. Her parents divorced, and a year after, she was raised by both, but separate, just a year after she was born, and then she was raised by both of them. She began her acting career on stage with David Mamet, and would go on to perform a lot with him, as did her husband. Best known as her role as Lynette Scavo in Desperate Housewives, she earned a Primetime Emmy Award for that role. She's married to Bill Macy. As I said, also has performed a great deal with David Mamet. They have 2 daughters, and it was one of the daughters that led to her arrest in 2019 for her involvement with the nationwide college entrance examination cheating scandal. She was charged with conspiracy to commit mail fraud and honest services mail fraud, and had to serve jail time. Audra McDonald, the winner of a record-breaking 6 Tony Awards, 2 Grammy Awards, and an Emmy. In 2015, she was named one of Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People, and she received the National Medal of the Arts from President Obama. Her Tony-winning performances were in Carousel, Masterclass, Ragtime, my favorite. Guess why? Porgy and Bess, Lady Day, at Emerson's Bar and Grill, and A Raisin in the Sun. She starred in world-class opera productions and in concert with internationally renowned orchestras. She's multi-talented. Her Emmy Award was for a role in PBS's Live from Lincoln Center. She's also received nominations for Wit, A Raisin in the Sun, so many others. She first appeared in television and in the CBS program The Good Wife, and appeared in a dozen movies, including Disney's live-action Beauty and the Beast. She's a founding member of the Black Theater United she's on the board of the Covenant House International, and a prominent advocate of LGBTQ rights. She says her favorite roles are those performing off stage as an activist, and a wife, and a mother. She and her husband and daughter live in Croton-on-Hudson. We're getting close now. Kate and Rooney Mara, both born and raised in Bedford, and they both built their careers on their own. No doubt about it. But I thought you'd be interested to note that they are the great-granddaughters of both New York Giants founder Tim Mara and Pittsburgh Steelers founder Art Rooney. They didn't go into football, though. They went into acting. Their maternal grandfather, Tim Rooney, has operated Yonkers Raceway since 1972, and their granduncle, Dan Rooney, is chairman of the Steelers. I can't imagine their household on Sundays. But they both went into acting. They both went through Bedford schools and Fox Lane. Kate appeared in television programs fairly young. She went into acting after performing in a school play. Probably her best known role is in House of Cards, in which she plays Zoe Barnes, an intrepid reporter from Washington, D.C. She got a nomination for an Emmy for that role. And Rooney Mara, her sister, made her acting debut years later when she was 20. Her best-known role is that of Lisbeth Sanders, the girl with the dragon tattoo, in the series by Stieg Nielsen, based on his books. She's been in 3 of the movies. But she devotes most of her time to a charity called Face of Kibera, which benefits orphans from the Kibera slum in Nairobi, Kenya. Next door in Pound Ridge, Blake Lively is played in films and on television. She was in Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, probably her most well-known. She married Ryan Reynolds in 2010 while filming Green Lantern, in which they co-starred. and they're raising 4 daughters in Pound Ridge in this house on 11 acres. Here they are voting in the last presidential election in Pound Ridge. And I have to show that stunning gown that turned colors so beautifully on the Met red carpet in 2022. Now our final 2. I know, I'm going backwards in time. I've taken you up chronologically, but now we're going back to Billie Burke, the only child of William Billy Burke, a singing clown in Barnum and Bailey Circus. She debuted in London in 1903. A delicate beauty with personality, she soon was the toast of the town. Celebrities like Mark Twain, Enrico Caruso, James Barrie, Somerset Maugham were among her backstage admirers. In 1913, she attended a New Year's Eve party at the Astor Hotel and met Florence Ziegfeld, who was quite a ladies' man. They married the following year, eloping to Hoboken, New Jersey. But they moved to her home in Hastings. It was a grand estate that was surrounded by a host of peculiar pets: an elephant, 2 bears, 2 lion cubs, 13 dogs, and a herd of deer. They raised their daughter there. She had just a swell time, and the kids in the neighborhood loved going for a play date to that house. And it was quite spectacular. Ziegfeld had the Ziegfeld Follies, of course, and when the Depression came, he lost all his money, but she continued working and was able to maintain the house. I gave this program a number of years ago to the Pelham's Women's Club, and somebody told me after that Ziegfeld had a little cottage in Pelham where he had a mistress. Now, this could be hearsay, and you learn so much when you take these programs on the road. They're both buried in Kensico Cemetery with this lovely statue at the gravesite. Described by Fred Astaire as the greatest entertainer who ever lived, Judy Garland was renowned for her unique voice. She had international stardom throughout a career of more than 40 years, but it could have been longer, in musical and dramatic roles, as a recording artist, and on concert stage. She had such versatility. She received a Juvenile Academy Award and won a Golden Globe Award and Grammy Awards and a special Tony Award. She was nominated by the Academy for Best Actress in A Star is Born and Best Supporting Actress for Judgment at Nuremberg. She still remains the youngest recipient of the Cecil B. DeMille Award that she got for Lifetime Achievement. After appearing in vaudeville with her 2 older sisters, she signed to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer as a teenager and made more than 24 films, including many with Mickey Rooney. Let's put on a show. And then, of course, the 1939 film for which she would be most closely identified, The Wizard of Oz. After 15 years, she was released from the studio but gained renewed success through record-breaking concert appearances. Despite her professional triumph, she struggled immensely in her personal life, beginning when she was a child. Her self-image was strongly influenced by film executives in a negative way. They would say she was unattractive and constantly manipulated her on-screen physical appearance. She was plagued by financial instability, owing thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars. She married 5 times, with her first 4 marriages ending in divorce. She had a long battle of drugs and alcohol, which ultimately led to her death at the age of 47. She lived at 1 Cornell Street in Scarsdale from June through December 1961. So we can claim her. I always say that it's a house that's the convergence of Mamaroneck, Scarsdale, and New Rochelle. And so New Rochelle realtors say she lived in New Rochelle, and Mamaroneck realtors say she lived in Mamaroneck, but really it was Scarsdale. And then I thought her last home would be at Ferncliff Cemetery, but even though she was buried there, her family decided she would be better off in California, and she was reinterred to a cemetery in California. So I will conclude this program with this picture where in the film that stars Judy Garland and Billy Burke. Billy Burke is the good witch Glinda, and Dorothy, of course, is clicking her heels, saying there's no place like home, there's no place like home, no place like home as Westchester. Thank you. Are there any questions? No?
Do you have a syllabus?
A syllabus? Do you have notes?
Yeah, I should have taken.
Did you do all the research?
Yes, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Impressive.
And I try to take the pictures of the homes myself, but if they're still living there, I can't do that. And I try not to divulge, homes that they're living in now, just to protect privacy. I also have a leading men of Westchester, which is actually twice as many, of course, because men had more parts, still have more parts. Yes, there is a question.
No, not a question. I just want to say that when we were finding David's Island, way back in 1990, Francis Sturgeon was very helpful to us. And a name that was known beyond our community, so she helped us fight the David's Island fight. And of course, Rooney Mara and her sister, their aunts and uncle lived here in Larchmont.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Yes.
One person I'm surprised you didn't mention is
Ethel Barrymore. And I have a list of all those I don't have. In fact, I'll show it to you. There's a whole list. I mean, Gloria Swanson, part of it is if I can't get the images, and she was so early. As you know, I do conclude her in my Holiday Image Makers program, which I'm giving this Saturday at the Harrison Library at 2 o'clock. And with Norman Rockwell, because Norman Rockwell delivered papers to Ethel Barrymore. And so I include her in that program, but thank you for that. Yeah.
You said Ragtime was one of your favorite movies, and then
Not movie, my favorite Broadway shows.
and then you said, and you know why.
Oh, I'm sorry, because it takes place in New Rochelle. E.L. Doctor wrote it living at 114 Broadview Avenue, and he was up in his turret in a 1907 house, and it takes place in New Rochelle. It's historical fiction. It blends many different historical figures and an incident that did not actually happen, but there are different places in Ragtime. When I went to the first, I've seen it 4 times. But it's a great show, no matter if it was New Rochelle or not. I don't want you to think I'm not obsessive, but when I went to the first production, and the curtain opens, and the scrim is New Rochelle Paragraph newspaper. I was just so excited, because as he goes through, and when I read the book, being a historian, I know that E.L. Doctor worked in the local history room at the old library, and I could tell that what pictures he saw, what things he did, what gave him the inspiration. In fact, I did a whole exhibit on it where I matched the old pictures to snippets from the book. And sure enough, this New Rochelle Paragraph from 1906, he had gone through the microfilm and had these inspiration from New Rochelle's history. And that was such a key time. There was so much going on, and the world was changing, and it was all, like the ragtime beat, it was syncopated, and he captures it in this book. So that's why I like it, and the music's great. The Boston Pops for 4th of July did a whole thing with ragtime that was with Audra McDonald singing. It was just terrific. Yeah, it was very good. So, no other questions?
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.